River bottom areas, whenever you have a lot of cottonwood trees or other big deciduous trees, it's fairly common to find places where dead bark starts to peel away from the trunk or from the hardwood. And in a case like this, with this cottonwood, you can see as I peel it away, there are long strips. The inner bark, as it dries out and dies, it can be pulled out in these long strips, which make excellent tinder material. So I'm going to gather some of that right now and take it with me to prepare for a fire, so I can pull off these large pieces and just strip the rough outer bark off, so I have these nice long skeins of inner bark. And I've got a good handful. That's what I'm going to use later whenever I prepare. Quite often that you'll find, in the case of this one, a place where the bark has started to pull away from the trunk of the tree, as you can see here, and you can feel it give whenever you start to give it a tug. And right here, if I pull it back, you can see I get a nice slab that falls off of it. And this is going to serve me in a couple purposes. First of all, I can use the bark as a platform to work off of, and second of all, these long shreds of the inner bark I'm going to use as my tinder material whenever I build a fire. So it's a fairly simple process. A few of these larger pieces of limbs that I have broken up, you can see where there's a natural crack in it already. So with a stout bush knife, in this case I have a Mountaineer 3 by J. Steel. It's got a good heft to it. I can set that in. This is basically going to act as a splitting wedge for me. So if I line that up with the split in the wood, and just pound it down with another tool, in this case a larger piece, you can see I've split that in half nicely, and I can just continue to break down these pieces further. So if you get to a smaller piece like this, where using this as a splitting wedge and pounding on it isn't as practical, if I've got a good solid base to work on, and I prefer a fixed blade knife with a good stout blade, I can use the tip and work it down between the grains of wood. Now notice I'm cutting away from myself here. Work it back and forth down into the grains of wood, and I can split those limbs down even smaller and continue to make this into finer and finer kindling. And again, these are for any type of wood. This happens to be deciduous wood, but by working that tip down in between the grains, I'm able to render this down into the type of material I need to really get a good fire going. Okay, so now we can see how we started out with something about this size, a large piece of fuel, several of them, and by using a stout fixed blade bush knife, we were able to break it down into our stages that we're going to need for fire building. Everything from our very small pencil thin for kindling all the way up to our larger fuel. Okay, so I have the platform that I took before off the cottonwood, nice big sturdy piece of bark, and I've got quite a bit of the strips of dead inner bark that I pulled out of there. And this is all going to be what I use whenever I start to build my fire. But one of the more important things to remember, and where a lot of folks have problems, is that to prepare this tinder, you basically want to make it look like a bird's nest. So these long strips, you want to pull out any of the stiff outer bark that might be in there, so that it starts to feel like a big bundle of corn husks. And from there I'm going to wad it up into a ball, and then I'm going to take that ball and rub it back and forth between my hands very firmly, and that's just going to break up the fibers more. And I'll do that back and forth a few times. And the idea, if you can think about making something that looks like a cotton ball, that's going to be a good guide. And you notice I have a big wad about the size of a softball. So now, as you can see, the fibers are a lot finer, and I have something that looks like a bird's nest. So whenever I strike my ignition source, whatever it is, whether it's a lighter or a match or a spark off of a fire steel, I'm going to put it right down here into the center, and that nest is going to sit on my platform, and I'll have a good place to catch the spark in this case from a fire steel. And then as it begins to burn, I'll be able to turn this nest over on top of itself so that the flames will work their way up through this. It's very fibrous. It's going to catch on fire, and it's going to give me a stronger, more sustainable flame.